Momo Ayase is one of the main characters of Dandadan, and at this point in the story, everything points to her being human, but what if that wasn't the case? What if she's actually part alien? You see, this has puzzled the mind of Dandadan fans for years, and in doing my research, I've come to the conclusion that Momo isn't an ordinary human. We can see this in the fact that she's able to use abilities no other human can. She's able to take hits no human should be able to, and this has been the case since the very first chapter. The real question is why? Well, let's look at all the evidence that points to Momo being half alien. For one, let's look at it from a narrative perspective. In the very first chapter, it's established that Momo doesn't believe in aliens and Okarun doesn't believe in spirits. That's what led to the challenge of proving which of these entities is indeed real. Thus, Momo visiting the abandoned medical center, while Okarun visited Turbo Granny's haunted tunnel. This of course led to Okarun getting cursed by Turbo Granny and Momo getting abducted by these Serpo aliens. So in both of these instances, they were both correct in that these entities do exist, but that isn't all that happened. As you guys know, Okarun didn't just discover the existence of spirits, he also gained the ability to use their power in the form of Turbo Granny. The same thing happened to Momo as well, in that she didn't just become aware of the existence of aliens, she also awakened a power similar to theirs. This stems from the fact that Momo's psychic ability is very similar to that of these Serpo aliens, in that it allows her to suppress the power of Okarun. This was pointed out by Okarun himself in chapter 20, when Serpo used what he later described as the Awesome Zone, which only works when they combine their psychokinetic powers. This also works on Aira's yokai form as well, as shown in chapter 21. What's interesting about this is that Momo somehow has the ability to repel the psychic waves of the Serpo alien, which totally negates their power. Now this by itself doesn't mean much, since you could argue that they both have psychic abilities, so it makes perfect sense why she would be able to cancel out their psychic waves. Though using that very same logic, she should have been able to cancel out the psychic waves of the death worm, but she wasn't able to. So the most likely conclusion one would arrive at is that the psychic waves of the death worm isn't something that can be repelled, but that also isn't the case. You see, as stated in chapter 37, the reason why Gigi wasn't susceptible to the worm's power is because Evil Eye was protecting him the entire time. So similar to how Momo has the ability to cancel out the psychic waves of the Serpo aliens, Evil Eye has the ability to cancel out the power of the worm. That's because, as stated by Turbo Granny, the Evil Eye's gaze makes people insane and drives them to self-destruct. This is of course similar to the power of the psychic worm, which leads to a cancelling effect of sort. So what this implies is that for one to be able to cancel out the psychic waves of another psychic, their power must be similar to that of the other person. So what exactly does this mean for Momo and these Serpo aliens? Well, obviously this means that she wasn't able to cancel out their power just because she's a psychic, but also because she's the same type of psychic. So one could take this to mean that their power simply functions in a similar way, or it could also be the case that it stems from the same place. So yokais of planet Earth such as the Deathworm and Evil Eye both operate on the same wavelength, which allows them to cancel each other's psychic waves, and the same applies to Momo and these Serpo aliens. Now with that said, there's more to this than just their powers being similar to that of these Serpo aliens. There's also the fact that Momo's abilities was somehow able to interact with an alien located in another dimension in chapter 86. She's also depicted with alien-themed earrings on the cover of volume 1 and alien-printed sneakers on the Dandadan movie poster. There's also the fact that when her powers manifested back in chapter 1, Tatsu for some reason changed the background to pitch black and added glowing stars, which is clearly hinting towards her power being linked to something not of this planet, otherwise known as aliens. This then leads me into my theory that she's possibly related to these Serpo aliens. Let's start with the fact that Momo's character is based on a character from Japanese folklore called Momotaro, otherwise known as the Peach Boy. In fact, the name Momo means peach in Japanese, and it's a name he was given after he was discovered in a literal peach by his adoptive parents. Now this ties into Momo's backstory as well, since she doesn't have parents as she stated in chapter 1. So she has been living with her granny Seiko the entire time, and this is backed up by the multiple flashbacks she got from the past. What this means is that it's also possible that Momo, similar to Momotaro, was adopted and Seiko isn't related to her by blood. This would make perfect sense since her powers are nothing like Seiko's. Yeah, they both have the ability to use chi, apparently, but Seiko's power seems to only function within the land she took the power from, as stated in chapter 4. She also needs to complete certain tasks as payment for using said power. Yet at the same time, Momo is able to use her abilities within any region, as seen in Seiko's location, Turbo Granny's city, and even Gigi's hometown. So she doesn't need to borrow the powers of any god, and she's still more powerful than Seiko even while she's using that power. So if they were blood related and their powers stem from the same mechanic, why does it function so differently? Well, that's likely because they aren't related. You see, this takes us back to the story of Momotaro. It's said that he was born from a giant peach which was found floating down the river by an old childless woman who was busy washing her clothing. The woman and her husband discovered the child when they tried to open the peach to eat it, and they later named that boy Momotaro. Now, it is later said that when he matured into adolescence, Momotaro left his parents to go fight a band of demons by seeking them out in their distant island where they dwelt, otherwise called Demon Island. En route, Momotaro met and befriended a talking dog, a monkey, and a pheasant who agreed to help him in exchange for a portion of his rations. He and his animal friends then penetrated the demon's fort and beat the band of demons into surrendering. They then returned home with the demon's treasures and the demon chief as a captive. Now, taking this story into account, one could presume that Seiko was a childless old woman who discovered Momo as a baby and decided to adopt her. Of course, there will be a few differences since Tatsu isn't trying to plagiarize the story of Momotaro, so maybe Seiko didn't have a husband and she took care of the child by herself. Maybe she didn't find Momo in a giant peach by the riverside, Maybe she found her in a temple, discarded on the street, or maybe she did know her parents and she took the child into hiding at their request. It could also be the case that she is Momo's grandmother, but one of her parents aren't from this planet, so it explains the differences in their abilities. This would also lead me to believe that Seiko knows that Momo is indeed half alien. That's why she wasn't surprised to learn that Momo has psychic powers, nor that they existed. That's why she later states that she fully believes that Momo has the power that made her feel invincible, but it's likely sealed or something. There's also the fact that she continued to deny the existence of aliens despite certainly knowing that they exist. This was somewhat hinted at in chapter 2 when Momo questioned why an alien would set off a chime set up to detect the presence of evil spirits. And while of course Okarun did give his theory as to why that happened, the most likely case is that it was created to detect aliens as well. Same as the talisman that was used to defeat said alien later on in the chapter, with Ayase obviously being an exception. By the way, there's this big misconception that aliens are not known to the world of Dandadan, yet in the very first chapter, Okarun outright states that the American military has officially acknowledged the existence of UAPs and has created a branch called Space Force, while Japan has founded the Japan Air and Space Self-Defense Force. Now this is really interesting because I doubt many readers remember this because I didn't until I did the research for this video, but it was stated in one of the character description pages attached to chapter 5 that the government had an experiment called Project Serpo. It said that in the 1960s and 1970s, with the support of aliens who survived the Roswell incident, the US military sent 12 people on a study exchange to planet Serpo, home of the Serbians. Of the 12, 2 of them died, 2 remained on planet Serpo, and 8 returned to planet Earth. But because of planet Serpo's powerful ultraviolet radiation, they all eventually died. Oh, by the way, the Roswell incident I mentioned before is later described as an incident in which 2 UFOs crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, back in 1947, which means that aliens have been on Earth since at least 1947 according to the government. This is later backed up by Serpo himself in chapter 86, where he explains to Momo that you have approximately 666 alien species in this galactic system. He later states that it's a possibility that the globally spaced aliens used warp technology to arrive on the planet from the farther reaches of space, but also later states that a mediating system is needed for long distance warps. That's when he first learned about the transmission systems such as the pyramids. In fact, the dead bodies found within them aren't mummies, but instead humans that were placed there to be sent to planets with advanced medical facilities. There's also a transmission system in Japan as well, which is described as the coffin burial mounds. What this then implies is that either the Serpo aliens were secretly abducting humans and sending them to their medical facilities for experiments, or the government was working together with these Serpo aliens and maybe other life forms to cure diseases or create enhanced humans. Either way, what this implies is that Momo is likely a product of these government-sanctioned experiments. Or it could also simply be the case that she had a human parent that fell in love with an alien and they later had a child that displayed immense powers. So in typical fashion, the government tried to take that child for themselves, so her parents decided to seal her power, as theorized by Seiko, and abandoned her where she would later be discovered by Seiko. So I can see a case where because her powers were somewhat loosened by the Serpo aliens back in chapter 1, the government might be monitoring the situation and they might be the antagonists later on in the future. Now what I also like to point out is that you have different versions of Momotaro's story. In one of them, it said that Momotaro wasn't born from a peach, but instead born naturally to the elderly couple who consumed the peach and regained their youth. This of course ties back into Seiko being described as a granny, while at the same time having the physical features of a young woman. So it could actually be the case that Seiko is Momo's biological mother, but she consumes something to make herself look younger, though I'm not sure why she would pretend to be a granny when she could easily pass as her mom based on how she looks, so I don't think that makes sense. I've also seen some theories saying that Seiko isn't a granny, she just pretends to be one, but even Turbo Granny acknowledges that she is a granny, so I doubt that's the case. The most likely case is that it's a combination of multiple variants of Momotaro's story, where Momo isn't her biological daughter, so she is adopted, but Seiko also found a way to remain youthful. And this shouldn't be impossible since you have Saint Germain, who apparently is thousands of years old or hundreds of years old, and he looks like a young guy, so we'll see how that one plays out. Oh, by the way, I want to mention this as well because I'm sure some will question why she needs to be half human and not just full-blooded alien, especially since we've seen human-looking aliens such as Vamola, and some aliens have the ability to take a human form. The reason for this, and maybe I'm wrong but we'll see, is because Momo is also able to interact with and manipulate Chi, which means that she must also possess Chi. And though it isn't outright stated in the manga itself, it is most likely the case that the basis behind the power of aliens and people of Earth isn't the same, but again, I could be wrong. We'll see. With that said guys, that is it for the video. Let me know your thoughts down below. And also, I did forget to mention that there's some similarities between the story of Momotaro with the pheasant, the dog, and the monkey, where some have drawn the correlation to Gigi, Okarun, and Ira being representation of those animals. And it kind of makes sense for Okarun because he does act like a dog. She literally says sick him in one of the panels and he just goes after the target. So yeah, I can see the parallels there, but I haven't seen the same thing for Gigi and Ira. Gigi does act like a bit of a fool sometimes, so I guess you can draw that to the monkey, but I don't know about the fire pheasant. Maybe it's just the brash personality that would be why Ira is comparable to that animal. So I don't know, you guys can maybe map it out in the comments and then we can have a conversation. But if you guys did like the video, drop a like and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.